Ethan Moreau's name was barely known outside Windsor until the morning he stole a silver Cadillac, crossed an international border, and vanished into a mystery that neither police nor time could fully unravel. The city of Windsor was still half asleep when the day began to stir. It was early February, the kind of cold that bites through coats and settles deep into your bones. A pale sun was just beginning to rise over the Detroit River, casting a faint orange glow across the frost-covered streets. Most people were tucked inside cafes or hurrying to their morning shifts, but one man sat alone in his car, engine idling, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. His name was Ethan Moreau. He was 29, a mechanic by trade, and lately, a man running out of options. Ethan's life had never gone according to plan. He'd grown up in Windsor, worked in small garages fixing other people's cars, and dreamed of owning his own someday. But the garage where he worked had been struggling for months. Bills piled up faster than the customers came in, and the owner had started missing paychecks. Ethan tried to keep faith that things would turn around, but faith doesn't pay rent. He'd borrowed money to keep afloat, money from the kind of people who didn't take excuses. By the time that morning arrived, Ethan was cornered. He'd spent the night pacing in his tiny apartment, staring at overdue notices and replaying every bad decision that led him there. He thought about his mother back in Sudbury, who still believed he was doing fine, about the stack of unopened letters on his kitchen table, and about the bruises on his shoulder from a friendly reminder he'd gotten a week earlier. When the first light broke, something inside him simply gave up. He drove downtown, looking for coffee and a distraction. That's when he saw it, a silver Cadillac Escalade gleaming like a trophy in the morning sun. It was parked just outside a corner cafe, the kind of place where the smell of roasted beans mixed with the sound of steaming milk. The vehicle was spotless, brand new, with a license plate from Toronto and a tiny dealership tag still hanging from the mirror. The driver, a man in a long coat, left the engine running while he stepped inside to grab his drink. Ethan sat there for a few seconds, watching the car through his windshield. The exhaust puffed steady white clouds into the air, each one catching the light. His pulse quickened. He didn't plan it. There was no thought, no strategy, no weighing of risk and reward. There was only impulse. Before he could talk himself out of it, he stepped out of his car, walked across the street, and opened the Escalade's driver door. The warmth of the running engine hit him instantly, along with the sharp scent of new leather. His hands trembled as he slid into the seat and shut the door behind him. He looked in the rearview mirror, half expecting the driver to come running out, but no one noticed. He shifted into drive, pressed the gas, and pulled away from the curb. The moment the tires touched the icy road, a rush of energy surged through him. Fear and freedom blended into one dizzying feeling. At that instant, a police cruiser turned onto the street a few blocks away, its lights flashing for another call. Ethan's heart nearly stopped. He pressed harder on the accelerator, merging into traffic, trying to look casual while his pulse thundered in his ears. Within minutes, he was on the highway heading south toward the bridge that connected Windsor to Detroit. The idea formed slowly. If he could cross the border, maybe he could buy himself time, maybe even vanish for a while. The sign for the Ambassador Bridge appeared ahead, blue letters against the gray morning sky. He took a deep breath and tightened his grip on the wheel. Behind him, the stolen Escalade gleamed in the side mirrors. Ahead, the bridge stretched toward the unknown, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt something close to purpose. He didn't know it yet, but that stolen moment of courage, or desperation, would change everything. The wind whipped across the steel arches of the Ambassador Bridge as Ethan's stolen Escalade climbed the incline toward the border. Morning traffic was thickening, trucks rumbling along in both directions, their exhaust mixing with the cold air. He could see the checkpoint booths ahead, small rectangles of glass and metal lined up in a row, each one guarded by border officers bundled in dark coats. A normal driver would slow down, roll down their window, and hand over their passport. Ethan knew that wasn't an option. The radio inside the Cadillac was still tuned to a local station. And between songs, he caught fragments of a news alert about a stolen vehicle. His stomach turned. They were already looking for him. For a moment, he considered turning back, abandoning the car and running, but fear made that impossible. The bridge offered only one direction now, and it was forward. The tires hummed against the pavement, the water below glinting like frozen glass. As he neared the booths, a border officer stepped out from a small building and lifted a hand toward the oncoming lane. Ethan saw it in his peripheral vision and reacted on instinct. He jerked the hole sharply, cutting into an empty inspection lane marked closed, the barrier arm lowered across it. The sound of the wooden pole splintering echoed through the air as he smashed through it. Shouts erupted behind him, a horn blared. Within seconds, red and blue lights flickered on both sides of the border. Cameras mounted above the lanes captured the Carjacking's license plate, transmitting it instantly to U.S. Customs and Border Protection systems. The pursuit became international. As Ethan crossed the halfway point of the bridge, the line that marked the border between Canada and the United States disappeared beneath his tires. Ahead, Detroit's skyline loomed through a thin veil of snow, its towers sharp and gray against the horizon. He pressed harder on the accelerator, heart pounding in rhythm with the engine. His mind raced with half-formed plans. Maybe he could ditch the car downtown, find a place to hide, call someone he trusted. But he couldn't think straight. The adrenaline was too much. Down below, on the Detroit side, a convoy of U.S. Border Patrol vehicles moved into position. Officers were briefed that the suspect might be armed and dangerous. To them, this wasn't just a car theft, it was a possible security breach. The bridge had been used before by smugglers, fugitives, and worse. They weren't taking chances. Ethan sped past the toll gates, nearly clipping another car. The road opened up, leading straight into the heart of Detroit. Sirens wailed in the distance, drawing closer by the second. Still, he didn't stop. He weaved between lanes, ignoring the honking horns and screeching brakes around him. Inside the Escalade, a low-fuel warning light blinked on. He hadn't noticed it before, but now it glared at him like an accusation. He needed to think fast. At the first off-ramp, he veered sharply right, the heavy vehicle lurching as the tires fought for grip on the icy pavement. The chase spilled into city streets lined with warehouses and loading docks. The radio chatter from law enforcement grew more frantic. Helicopters were being dispatched. Units from both sides of the border coordinated over shared channels. They knew his name now. They had his photo from traffic cameras. For a brief moment, as he turned down a deserted industrial road, silence returned. No sirens, no engines, just the faint hum of the Escalade cooling down. Ethan pulled over and took a deep breath, trying to calm his shaking hands. He didn't realize how close the net around him was tightening. What he couldn't know was that the car he'd stolen wasn't just valuable, it was evidence. Inside its trunk was something hidden, something that would pull him even deeper into danger than he could possibly imagine. The Escalade's engine ticked quietly as it cooled in the shadow of an old warehouse. Ethan sat behind the wheel, staring at his reflection in the rearview mirror. His face was pale, his breath fogging the glass. Every muscle in his body trembled from the crash of adrenaline. He could still hear sirens in the distance, echoing faintly through the cold Detroit air, though they seemed to be moving in another direction. For the moment, he was invisible. He knew he couldn't stay there long, but curiosity pulled at him. He had stolen the car without thinking, but now he wanted to know who it really belonged to. He opened the glove box first. A few receipts, a pair of sunglasses, and a sealed manila envelope sat inside. The envelope was thick, its edges creased as if handled too often. It bore a red customs stamp and a faint watermark he couldn't make out. His hands hesitated before tearing it open. Inside were several passports, all with different names but featuring the same face, a face that didn't belong to him. There were also sheets of paper printed with lists of dates and initials and a handful of U.S. entry permits stamped over the past few months. At the bottom was a small metallic key taped to a folded note that read only, Locker 312, Detroit Central Station. The words didn't mean much to him at first. Detroit Central Station had been closed for years, just an empty monument of stone and silence. Still, something about the note felt deliberate, like it was waiting for someone who wasn't supposed to be him. He stuffed the papers back into the envelope and placed it on the passenger seat, his mind racing. Whatever was going on, it wasn't just a stolen vehicle. He had stumbled into something organized, something that crossed borders the way he just had. Meanwhile, across the city, law enforcement was beginning to piece the story together. Canadian police had traced the stolen Escalade to a man named Claude Renault, a mid-level contractor for the customs agency. Renault had been under quiet investigation for months, suspected of helping a group smuggle people and identities across the border in exchange for cash. The Escalade wasn't just his personal car, it was part of his operation. The documents Ethan had just found were evidence in a federal case, materials that investigators hadn't even known existed. Unaware of the scale of what he'd taken, Ethan decided he needed a safe place to think. He drove aimlessly through Detroit's narrow back streets, passing shuttered shops and graffiti-covered walls, until he parked in a lot behind an old diner. From there, he watched the police vehicles speed by, their sirens fading into the distance. His nerves began to settle just enough for the next thought to take shape. If the key led to something valuable, maybe it was his way out. Maybe it could erase the mess he'd made. He turned the small key over in his hand, the number 312 etched faintly into the metal. It looked ordinary, yet it seemed to hum with possibility. Curiosity began to overtake fear. He didn't know who Claude Renault was, didn't know what the documents meant, and didn't care who might be looking for them. All that mattered now was finding the locker and whatever was inside it. He started the engine again and glanced in the mirror. The horizon glowed orange as the winter sun dipped lower, reflecting off the frozen river behind him. He shifted into gear and pulled onto the road, the Cadillac gliding smoothly over the cracked pavement. The thought that someone could already be tracking him didn't cross his mind. Somewhere in a Border Patrol operations center, analysts were reviewing traffic footage frame by frame. They'd spotted the stolen vehicle leaving the bridge and traced its route toward the industrial district. The chase wasn't over, it had only gone quiet. And as Ethan drove toward the derelict train station, clutching the small key that could change everything, every camera in the city was watching his next move. Detroit Central Station loomed like a sleeping giant against the winter sky. Once a symbol of movement and progress, it now stood abandoned, its windows shattered and walls marked by time. Snow clung to the edges of the grand stone archways, and the faint sound of wind whistled through broken panes. Ethan parked the Escalade behind a row of dumpsters, the vehicle's glossy surface looking out of place in the decaying landscape. He stepped out, the crunch of gravel beneath his boots echoing through the emptiness. The small metal key in his pocket felt heavier with every step. Inside, the station was colder than the street. Dust floated in thin beams of light cutting through gaps in the boarded windows. His footsteps echoed across cracked tiles and scattered debris, old newspapers, soda cans, forgotten luggage tags from another era. The air smelled of rust and mold. Somewhere far above, a loose sign creaked on its hinges. Ethan moved carefully, scanning the walls until he spotted a row of rusted lockers lining the corridor beyond the ticket hall. Most were dented, some missing doors altogether, but their numbers were still visible beneath layers of grime. He walked slowly, counting them one by one until he reached 312. The locker's door was faded blue, its metal warped but still intact. He hesitated for a moment, his breath visible in the cold air, then slid the key into the lock. It turned with a soft click, the sound echoing faintly in the empty space. When the door swung open, he found a duffel bag wrapped tightly in clear plastic. Inside, stacks of cash were folded with precision, the edges crisp and new. Tucked beside the money were several USB drives labeled only with letters, a through D, and a small black satellite phone that was still powered on. The phone's screen glowed faintly, a signal icon pulsing in the corner. Ethan stared at it, unsure what to do. He picked it up, flipping through its contacts list, but there was only one entry, a number without a name. He set it back down, his heart thudding. It didn't take long for him to realize the phone might be active, possibly tracked. Outside, the black SUVs rolled quietly into the area. Agents moved swiftly through the snow, weapons drawn, voices low over their radios. The signal from the satellite phone had led them straight there. They surrounded the station without headlights, their boots crunching softly as they fanned out across the entrance. Ethan felt the vibration of the approaching engines before he heard them. Panic surged through him. He zipped the duffel bag shut and looked around for a place to hide. His gaze landed on a large vent grate halfway up the wall, its bolts loose, the metal slightly bent outward. Without thinking, he climbed onto a fallen piece of scaffolding and forced the vent open. He shoved the duffel bag inside and let it slide into the darkness beyond. Shouts echoed from the main entrance as flashlights sliced through the gloom. He dropped back to the ground and ran toward the far corridor. The noise of boots and radios grew louder behind him. He didn't make it far before the first beam of light hit his back and a voice barked for him to stop. He froze, raising his hands as agents closed in from all sides. They tackled him to the cold tile floor, his breath knocked out in a sharp gasp. Within minutes, the scene was secured. Officers searched the locker, found it empty except for a torn strip of plastic, and radioed the update. They had their suspect, but the evidence, the money, the drives, the phone was gone. Somewhere inside the labyrinth of vents and old tunnels, it had vanished completely. As Ethan was led outside in handcuffs, he glanced back once at the towering building behind him. Snow began to fall again, covering the footprints that led to locker 312 as if erasing the trail. The days that followed were a blur of bright lights, cold rooms, and questions that Ethan couldn't answer. He sat through endless interrogations with agents from both sides of the border, each one more certain than the last that he had stolen the Escalade for a reason. They wanted to know who had sent him, who he worked for, what he knew about the documents and the locker. Ethan repeated the same story until his voice went hoarse, that he hadn't known what was in the car, that it was a spur-of-the-moment decision. He was just a desperate man who made a terrible mistake. Some of them believed him. Others didn't. When the investigation expanded, the truth about the vehicle's owner came out. Claude Renault, the customs contractor, was arrested within days after Ethan's capture. His connection to a network that sold forged passports and smuggled identities across the US-Canada border became headline news. Agents discovered offshore accounts, hidden transactions, and encrypted messages that hinted at years of corruption. But one piece of the puzzle remained missing: the bag. The evidence that could have proven how deep the operation went had vanished without a trace. Search teams combed through Detroit Central Station for weeks. They took apart sections of the walls, sent dogs into the tunnels, and even brought in heat-sensing drones. Nothing turned up. The duffel bag seemed to have disappeared into the building itself. Some investigators suspected Ethan had an accomplice waiting nearby who retrieved it after his arrest, but no footage or witnesses supported that theory. Others believed the bag might still be buried somewhere in the station, sealed behind a collapsed section of the vent system. With no proof either way, the mystery grew. Ethan was eventually charged with grand theft auto, fleeing law enforcement, and illegal border entry. He took a plea deal that spared him from federal prison but sent him to a Michigan state facility for 3 years. During that time, the media lost interest. The story faded from headlines, replaced by newer scandals and louder crimes. The smuggling ring was dismantled, but rumors lingered that a portion of the operation had survived, protected by someone higher up who was never caught. When Ethan was released, he crossed back into Canada quietly. No reporters waited for him, no one asked for interviews, and that suited him fine. He found work in a small repair shop outside Windsor, keeping to himself, fixing engines the way he used to before everything unraveled. People in town knew little about his past, only that he preferred long hours and short conversations. Sometimes, late at night, he would drive to the riverfront and stare at the lights of Detroit flickering across the water. He'd think about the bridge, the sirens, and the locker that changed his life. He never talked about the key or the bag, and when asked why he did what he did, he simply said he didn't remember. But those who saw him during those quiet moments swore there was something in his eyes, not guilt exactly, but a kind of knowing. The Escalade was eventually returned to the government after months in evidence storage. The documents inside were filed away, incomplete but still useful enough to convict Claude Renault. The duffel bag, the cash, and the drives were never recovered. Over time, stories began to circulate that a maintenance worker had stumbled upon them and fled the city, that a former agent sold the contents to make the whole case disappear, that the truth was sealed somewhere in the forgotten walls of the station. Years passed, but every now and then, a rumor surfaced about someone trying to find locker 312 again. Most dismissed it as urban legend. Yet the idea remained that beneath the crumbling station, hidden behind rusted vents and dust, lay the final piece of a story that began with one man's desperate choice on a freezing morning in Windsor.